Edit: the easiest person to underestimate is the one who never tells you how much power she carries. At exactly 7:12 on a cool Monday morning, while the city of Ashford was only beginning to shake off the quiet stillness of dawn, a black SUV rolled past the front entrance of the Ashford Police Department without slowing down. It never stopped beneath the flagpole where senior officials were usually welcomed. It never pulled into the reserved parking space marked for the incoming chief. Instead, it disappeared around the corner, leaving a single woman to continue the last few blocks on foot with nothing more than a dark leather briefcase, a navy overcoat, and the calm confidence of someone who had already made peace with whatever she was about to discover. Danielle Brooks walked toward the station as the first rays of sunlight reflected against rows of glass windows that had witnessed decades of promises, failures, and silent compromises. From outside, the building looked like any other police headquarters in America: sturdy brick walls, polished steel doors, and an American flag moving gently in the crisp morning breeze. But buildings never told the whole story. People did. And Danielle had accepted her new assignment because of people, not walls. 6 months of internal reports had painted an unsettling picture. Complaints had vanished. Witness statements had been rewritten. Cameras had mysteriously failed whenever accusations of misconduct surfaced. The paperwork looked clean. The truth did not. She had been offered the position of police chief with every formality the city could provide, yet she had declined the ceremonial arrival, the escort, and even the official announcement until later that morning. She wanted one thing before anyone saluted her rank. She wanted to see how officers behaved when they believed no one important was watching. The leather briefcase in her hand held nothing flashy from the outside, but inside rested her appointment documents, departmental directives, and several files connected to unresolved disciplinary reviews that would soon reshape careers. She reached the front steps and paused for only a second, taking in the sound of distant sirens, the faint aroma of fresh coffee drifting from inside, and the quiet rhythm of officers beginning another ordinary shift. Ordinary, she thought, was often where extraordinary truths preferred to hide. As Danielle pushed through the heavy glass doors, conversations continued without interruption. Radios crackled. Phones rang. Boots echoed across polished tile floors beneath harsh fluorescent lights. Some officers hurried past carrying reports. Others laughed near the reception desk without noticing her at all. She offered a polite smile to the civilian clerk, who returned a distracted nod before looking back at a computer screen. It was exactly the reaction Danielle expected. No introductions. No recognition. No assumptions beyond what people believed they could see. She adjusted her grip on the briefcase and headed toward the secured hallway leading deeper into the building. Halfway there, a sharp voice cut through the morning noise. Where D? Edit. The sergeant took 2 slow steps forward until only a few feet separated them. His nameplate read Mark Harlan, polished so carefully that it reflected the bright fluorescent lights above. Years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, or at least what he believed were instincts. Danielle noticed the confidence in his posture long before he spoke again. It was the confidence of someone who had rarely been questioned inside these walls. He folded his arms and looked briefly at the leather briefcase in her hand before returning his attention to her face. Work, he repeated with a dry laugh that drew the attention of 2 younger officers standing nearby. Employees use the staff entrance after checking in. Visitors stay in the lobby. Danielle kept her voice even. I appreciate the information. I simply need to reach the administrative offices. Mark tilted his head slightly. Do you have an appointment? You could say that. Her answer was truthful, but it was not the answer he expected. One of the younger officers, Tyler Reed, exchanged an amused glance with another deputy before leaning casually against the reception counter. Maybe she is looking for human resources, he joked. Quietly, earning a few restrained smiles from those close enough to hear. Danielle neither reacted nor looked offended. Instead, she calmly observed every face in the hallway, every badge number, every expression that shifted as the conversation continued. The station itself seemed frozen between routine and curiosity. Computer keyboards continued clicking in distant offices. A dispatcher answered emergency calls behind reinforced glass. Somewhere upstairs, a printer hummed steadily as paperwork rolled into an output tray. Life inside the department moved forward, yet a subtle tension had begun spreading through the building like a ripple across still water. Mark extended one hand toward the briefcase. "Identification, please." Danielle nodded politely. "Of course." She started to open the brass clasp, but before she could lift the lid, Mark raised his hand again. "Leave it closed." His tone had become noticeably firmer. "I will decide what needs to be checked." Danielle slowly released the clasp and rested both hands lightly on the handle instead. "Sergeant, I am happy to cooperate. I only ask that we follow department procedure." Those words seemed to irritate him more than challenge him. Procedure was a word that carried weight in every police department, and hearing it from someone he assumed was an outsider felt strangely personal. Tyler stepped closer. "She sure sounds like she has read the handbook," he muttered. A few quiet chuckles followed. Danielle looked directly at Mark without raising her voice. "May I have your badge number?" The laughter stopped almost immediately. For a brief moment, even Tyler looked uncertain. Most civilians never asked that question with such calm precision. Mark answered with a faint smile that never reached his eyes. "Why would you need that?" Danielle responded just as evenly. "Because accountability begins with names." The hallway fell silent again. Above them, the small security camera remained fixed on the scene, its tiny recording light glowing steadily. None of Mark Harlan held Danielle's gaze for another long moment before taking a slow breath through his nose. "Accountability," he repeated quietly, almost as if the word itself had become an irritation. He looked around the hallway, noticing that more officers had begun watching the exchange than he preferred. Whatever this woman was doing, she was changing the atmosphere inside his station without raising her voice. He shifted his attention toward Tyler Reed. "Go check the visitor log." Tyler walked to the reception desk, flipped through several pages, then looked back with a confident grin. Nothing. No appointment. No scheduled meeting. Nobody signed in under her name. Mark nodded as though the answer confirmed everything he already believed. "There you have it." Danielle listened without interrupting. "That log only records visitors who have been processed through the front desk," she replied calmly. "Not every person entering this building falls into that category." Tyler shrugged. "Sounds convenient." A few officers laughed softly again, but the laughter faded much faster this time. Something about Danielle's composure made every sarcastic remark seem smaller than the silence that followed it. Emily Carter remained near the records office, pretending to organize paperwork while quietly observing every detail. She noticed Danielle never once raised her voice, never stepped closer in an intimidating way, and never responded emotionally despite the growing tension. Instead, Danielle seemed to be studying the room itself. Her eyes briefly rested on the hallway camera, then on the emergency exit, then on the framed department values displayed along the wall. Integrity. Service. Respect. Accountability. The polished silver letters reflected the overhead lights with almost painful clarity. Danielle looked back at Mark. "Those are admirable principles." Mark answered with a restrained smile. "We take them seriously here." Danielle gave a slight nod. "I sincerely hope so." The words were polite, yet they carried enough quiet confidence to make Tyler glance toward his sergeant before speaking again. "You still have not explained why you are here." Danielle rested one hand gently on the briefcase. "I came because today matters." "To whom?" Mark asked. "To everyone in this building," Danielle answered. That response earned puzzled looks instead of laughter. At that exact moment, the public address speaker crackled softly overhead before a dispatcher announced that all command staff should report to the second-floor conference room within the hour for the scheduled leadership welcome. The message echoed through every hallway before fading into silence. Tyler smirked. "Sounds like an important morning." Danielle smiled politely. "It certainly is." Mark looked at his watch, clearly aware that preparations for the ceremony were already underway. City officials would soon arrive. Department supervisors would gather upstairs. The incoming police chief was expected before long, and everything needed to appear organized. Yet standing in front of him was a woman who refused to appear nervous despite being questioned in the middle of the lobby. That confidence continued bothering him more than any explanation she could have offered. Danielle slowly reached into the outer pocket of her overcoat. Every nearby officer instinctively watched the movement. She withdrew nothing more threatening than a folded business card and extended it toward Mark. "If you prefer, you may contact the number on this card before making any assumptions." Mark accepted it with visible skepticism. He glanced down only briefly before slipping it into his uniform pocket without reading it. "That will not be necessary," Danielle answered with the same measured tone she had used since entering the building. "Sometimes taking one extra minute saves everyone a great deal of trouble." Mark dismissed the suggestion with a small wave of his hand. Around them, conversations had completely stopped. Officers who had intended to continue their morning routines now found themselves quietly waiting to see what the sergeant would do next, while high above the hallway, the small security camera continued recording every decision without judgment and without interruption. Mark Harlan looked at the silent faces gathering around the lobby and seemed to reach a decision. Whatever uncertainty had flickered across his expression disappeared behind years of habit and unquestioned authority. He took one deliberate step closer and extended his hand toward Danielle's briefcase again. "I have asked you more than once," he said evenly. "Place the case on the counter so we can inspect it." Danielle did not pull it away, nor did she surrender it immediately. She simply answered with the same measured composure that had unsettled the room from the moment she walked through the front doors. "Sergeant, there are official documents inside that should be handled according to department policy. If you would like to verify my identity, I will gladly cooperate through the proper procedure." Mark's expression hardened. To him, every calm sentence sounded less like cooperation and more like resistance. Tyler folded his arms, convinced the conversation had already gone on far too long. "If there is nothing unusual inside," he said, "then there should not be any hesitation." Danielle turned toward him with a polite smile. "There is a difference between transparency and ignoring procedure. Good organizations understand that difference." Those words lingered in the hallway longer than anyone expected. Emily Carter quietly looked toward the framed statement of departmental values mounted beside the reception desk. Respect. Integrity. Accountability. She had passed those words every morning for 4 years, but somehow they felt different now. She also noticed the tiny indicator light on her body camera. Department policy required it to remain active during official interactions unless instructed otherwise through documented procedure. Without drawing attention to herself, she confirmed that it was still recording. Mark rested his fingertips on the leather briefcase before looking directly into Danielle's eyes. "You keep mentioning procedure. Let me explain mine. I decide what happens inside this building." Danielle answered almost immediately. Leadership is not measured by how much authority someone claims. It is measured by how responsibly that authority is used. The hallway became so quiet that even the distant ringing of a telephone seemed unusually loud. No one interrupted. No one laughed anymore. Several officers shifted uneasily, sensing that this conversation had moved far beyond a routine security question. Mark slowly lifted the briefcase from Danielle's hand and placed it on the nearby counter. She allowed him to do so without protest, watching carefully but making no sudden movement. The brass clasps reflected the bright ceiling lights as though they were quietly waiting to reveal something much larger than paperwork. Mark rested one hand on the closed case without opening it. "Last opportunity," he said. "Tell me exactly who you are." Danielle met his stare without hesitation. "I already have. I told you I came here to work, and I told you this morning matters." Tyler shook his head with visible disbelief. "She still thinks she is going to walk past us." Danielle did not answer him. Instead, she glanced once more toward the security camera above the hallway, then toward Emily, whose concerned expression had become impossible to hide. Finally, Danielle returned her attention to Mark and spoke with remarkable calm. "Every decision we make in the next few minutes will still exist long after this conversation ends." Before anyone could respond, the public address system sounded again, this time with greater urgency. "Attention all supervisors and command personnel. The welcome ceremony for the incoming police chief will begin in 15 minutes. Please report to the second-floor conference room immediately." The announcement echoed through the building, and for the briefest moment, every person standing in that hallway looked toward the staircase, unaware that the individual they were preparing to welcome was already standing quietly among them, watching every choice they made. Mark Harlan glanced toward the staircase where supervisors were already beginning to disappear into the conference room, then back at Danielle as if refusing to let the moment end without proving a point. The announcement about the incoming police chief had changed nothing in his mind. If anything, it strengthened his determination to show everyone nearby that he remained in control of the front lobby. He rested one hand firmly on the leather briefcase and looked at Tyler Reed. "Stay here." Tyler straightened immediately. "Yes, Sergeant." Danielle remained perfectly still. She neither reached for the briefcase nor protested its removal. Her composure had become impossible to ignore. It was not the calm of someone who believed luck would rescue her. It was the patience of someone allowing people to reveal themselves through their own choices. Emily Carter watched the exchange with growing concern. She quietly checked the recording indicator on her body camera once more. The small light continued blinking exactly as department policy required. She remembered every annual ethics class emphasizing that professionalism was measured most clearly when emotions ran high. Looking around the hallway, she wondered how many people still remembered those lessons. Mark slowly released the brass clasps on the briefcase but stopped before opening it. He looked directly at Danielle. "You have one final chance to explain why you walked into a restricted area without authorization." Danielle answered without hesitation. "I walked through the front entrance of a public building during business hours. I identified my purpose. I requested that established procedure be followed. Everything after that has been your decision, Sergeant." Her words settled over the room with quiet precision. Nobody interrupted. Even Tyler seemed less certain than before. Mark frowned, clearly irritated that every answer she gave sounded more reasonable than confrontational. He placed both hands on the briefcase and finally lifted the lid a few inches. Before anyone could see what was inside, Danielle spoke again, not loudly, but clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Please remember exactly how you handle those documents." Mark paused for only a fraction of a second before opening the case farther. Neatly organized folders rested inside beside a dark portfolio and several sealed envelopes bearing official city markings. Rather than examining the labels, he immediately removed the top folder and set it on the counter. Tyler leaned forward, expecting to find something suspicious. Instead, he saw professionally organized paperwork, color-coded tabs, and carefully prepared reports. Nothing appeared unusual. Mark flipped through several pages without reading them closely. "Looks like a lot of paperwork," Tyler muttered. Danielle nodded slightly. "Some paperwork changes careers." Neither officer seemed interested in what she meant. Mark continued searching until he found another sealed envelope, then held it in his hand without opening it. Across the lobby, the elevator doors opened, and two city employees carrying presentation materials hurried toward the conference room upstairs. One of them glanced briefly toward Danielle before continuing down the hallway, apparently assuming she was simply involved in an administrative discussion. The station remained busy, yet an invisible line had formed around the growing confrontation. People continued working, but many did so while quietly listening. Danielle shifted her attention toward the framed mission statement mounted near the entrance. "Service before self. Integrity without compromise." She read every word silently before turning back toward Mark. "Those promises are impressive," she said softly. "Communities place enormous trust in the people who wear this uniform." Mark looked up from the documents. "We earn that trust every day." Danielle met his eyes with unwavering calm. Then today is another opportunity to earn it. At that exact moment, a phone rang sharply at the reception desk. The civilian clerk answered, listened for several seconds, then looked toward the hallway with visible surprise before speaking just loudly enough for nearby officers to hear. Deputy Chief Hayes just called. He wants to know if anyone has seen the new police chief. She was supposed to arrive earlier than expected. The receptionist lowered the phone slowly, and for the first time that morning, uncertainty spread across the front lobby faster than conversation. Deputy Chief Hayes said the welcoming ceremony cannot begin until the new police chief arrives, she announced. He asked everyone to report immediately if they see her. Tyler looked toward the staircase, then back at Mark with a confident grin. She is probably stuck in traffic. Mark nodded without taking his eyes off the documents lying open across the counter. She will be here soon enough. Danielle remained silent. Her attention drifted briefly toward the second floor, where muffled footsteps echoed through the hallway as supervisors gathered inside the conference room. She imagined the rows of empty chairs, the carefully prepared welcome remarks, the city officials checking their watches, and the covered portrait waiting to be unveiled. Every minute that passed allowed the truth to move one step closer without her needing to force it. Mark closed the folder and slid it aside. Nothing here explains why you ignored instructions. Danielle answered with the same quiet certainty that had defined every word she spoke that morning. Sometimes people become so focused on proving authority that they stop looking for the truth standing directly in front of them. Tyler shook his head. You really enjoy speaking in riddles. Danielle smiled politely. No. I simply believe people reveal themselves faster when they are allowed to keep talking. Emily felt those words settle heavily in her mind. She replayed the entire encounter from the moment Danielle had entered the building. Not once had the woman insulted anyone. Not once had she raised her voice. Every response had been respectful, every request reasonable. Yet the atmosphere continued growing more uncomfortable, not because of Danielle, but because of the reaction surrounding her. Emily quietly glanced toward her body camera again. The recording indicator still flashed steadily, preserving every conversation exactly as it happened. Mark picked up one of the sealed envelopes from the briefcase and studied the official city seal pressed into the flap. He frowned slightly. What is inside this one? Danielle answered immediately. Documents intended to be opened by the person whose name appears on the front. Mark turned the envelope over. The recipient line faced downward against his palm, hidden from everyone else. Without thinking, he placed it beside the other folders instead of reading it. Danielle noticed the small detail but said nothing. Across the lobby, another announcement echoed through the building. Attention all personnel. Deputy Chief Robert Hayes requests that any officer who has contact with the incoming police chief notify him immediately. The word seemed to linger in the air. Several officers exchanged puzzled looks. One whispered that nobody had seen the new chief arrive. Another wondered whether City Hall had changed the schedule without notice. Danielle simply listened. She could almost feel the station beginning to question itself. Mark finally pushed the briefcase back across the counter toward her. You are not going any farther until I finish verifying everything. Danielle accepted the case without argument and carefully closed the brass clasps. That is your decision, she replied. Just remember that every decision creates a record, whether it is written on paper or remembered by the people who witness it. Before Mark could respond, the elevator doors opened again. This time Deputy Chief Robert Hayes stepped into the lobby, walking quickly with the focused expression of someone searching for one person and one person alone. His eye swept across the room, passing over Tyler, Emily, the receptionist, and finally stopping on the familiar dark leather briefcase resting in Danielle Brooks's hands. The color drained from his face before he said a single word. Deputy Chief Robert Hayes stopped so suddenly that the polished floor seemed to steal the sound from his footsteps. His eyes remained fixed on Danielle Brooks, then shifted to the leather briefcase in her hand before returning to her face. For a brief second, nobody understood why one of the highest-ranking officers in the department looked as though the entire morning had just unraveled in front of him. Mark Harlan noticed the expression and frowned. "Deputy Chief," he said confidently, "we are handling a situation." Robert barely acknowledged him. His attention never left Danielle. He said carefully, "I have been trying to reach you." Danielle answered with the same calm voice she had carried since walking through the front entrance. "I know." Mark looked from one to the other, clearly confused. "You know each other?" Robert finally turned toward the gathering officers. His face reflected disbelief more than anger. "Sergeant Harlan," he asked slowly, "has no one introduced themselves?" Mark crossed his arms. "She entered a restricted area without proper authorization. We have been verifying her identity." Robert looked at the open folders spread across the counter, then at the sealed envelope Mark had handled only moments before. "Did you read the name on that envelope?" Mark glanced down for the first time. His hand moved almost automatically toward the envelope, turning it over until the printed recipient line faced upward. The lobby became perfectly silent. Typed across the front in bold black letters were the words, "Chief Danielle Brooks, Ashford Police Department." Tyler leaned forward, his expression changing from confidence to confusion in a matter of seconds. Emily slowly lowered the paperwork she had been holding. Even the receptionist stopped typing. Mark stared at the envelope without speaking. Danielle waited patiently, giving him every opportunity to absorb what was directly in front of him. Robert stepped beside her. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying naturally through the hallway, "allow me to introduce the new Chief of Police for the city of Ashford, Chief Danielle Brooks." The words echoed through the lobby with astonishing weight. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The same officers who had watched Danielle with curiosity only minutes earlier now looked at her with stunned disbelief. Tyler's face lost all color. He replayed every joke he had made since she entered the building. Emily quietly closed her eyes for a brief moment, realizing the respectful instinct she had felt all morning had not been misplaced. Mark remained frozen beside the counter, his eyes shifting between Danielle, the envelope, and Robert as though searching for some explanation that would change what had just happened. There was none. Danielle offered Robert a courteous nod before turning back toward the officers surrounding her. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse anyone. She simply looked around the lobby with calm, deliberate attention, making eye contact with each person who had witnessed the encounter. "Good morning," she said. "I was hoping my first conversation here would be about the future of this department. Instead, it has become an opportunity to learn something much more important." The silence deepened. Danielle gently rested her briefcase on the counter and continued. "Every organization reveals its culture long before it introduces its leadership. This morning has been very informative." No one attempted to interrupt her. The fluorescent lights continued humming softly overhead, the security camera remained fixed on the lobby, and somewhere upstairs an audience still waited to welcome a chief who, without announcing herself, had already completed the most revealing inspection of her new department. For several long seconds, no one in the lobby seemed willing to breathe. The confidence that had filled the room only moments earlier quietly dissolved beneath the weight of a simple truth. Danielle Brooks had never needed to announce who she was. She had simply allowed everyone else to reveal who they were first. Deputy Chief Robert Hayes looked toward the gathered officers before speaking carefully. "The welcoming ceremony can wait." His voice was calm, but every word carried unmistakable authority. "What happened here this morning deserves our immediate attention." Danielle nodded once. "I agree." She turned toward Sergeant Mark Harlan without anger or satisfaction. "Sergeant, I would like every security recording from this lobby preserved exactly as it exists today. No edits. No copies. No interruptions to the chain of custody." Mark swallowed quietly before answering. "Yes, Chief." The title sounded unfamiliar on his tongue. Danielle continued. "I also want every body camera recording from every officer involved secured according to departmental policy." Emily Carter instinctively placed one hand near her body camera. Danielle noticed the movement immediately. "Officer Carter, thank you for following procedure." Emily looked surprised. Chief, my camera remained active during the entire interaction. Danielle gave a small nod. That decision may become very important. Tyler Reed lowered his eyes toward the floor. The confidence that had fueled his earlier comments had disappeared completely. Danielle did not embarrass him. Instead, she addressed the entire room. This is not about humiliating anyone. It is about understanding how decisions are made when people believe they're dealing with someone who has no authority. Her words settled over the officers with uncomfortable honesty. Robert Hayes quietly gathered the folders that had been removed from Danielle's briefcase and placed them back inside with great care. Chief, I apologize that your official documents were handled before your arrival was confirmed. Danielle accepted the briefcase and closed the brass clasps herself. Thank you, Deputy Chief. The documents matter, but the decisions surrounding them matter even more. She slowly walked a few steps toward the framed department values mounted on the wall. Respect. Integrity. Accountability. Service. She studied the words for a moment before looking back at the officers standing behind her. These are not decorations, she said softly. They are promises. Every member of this department inherits those promises the moment a badge is placed on a uniform. No one argued. No one looked away. Even the routine sounds of the station seemed quieter than before. Danielle continued with steady confidence. Before accepting this position, I spent months reviewing reports, community feedback, and professional evaluations. I learned a great deal from documents. This morning, I learned even more from people. Mark slowly raised his eyes. For the first time since the encounter began, there was no trace of certainty in his expression, only reflection. Danielle did not accuse him personally, nor did she deliver immediate punishment in front of the department. Instead, she spoke with measured fairness. Every employee deserves due process. Every decision deserves objective review. That principle protects the public, and it protects honest officers as well. She then looked toward Robert Hayes. Deputy Chief, please arrange an independent review of today's recordings, written reports, and all related documentation. I want facts, not assumptions. I want evidence, not opinions. Whatever the truth shows, we will accept it together. Robert answered without hesitation. Yes, Chief. Danielle offered one final look around the lobby before walking toward the conference room upstairs. Behind her, nobody spoke. They simply watched as the woman they had underestimated transformed an ordinary Monday morning into the beginning of a department that would never again be able to pretend character mattered less than authority. The conference room was filled to capacity by the time Danielle Brooks stepped through the doorway carrying the same leather briefcase that had quietly changed the course of the morning. City officials rose from their seats. Department supervisors stood in respectful silence. No grand introduction was necessary anymore. Everyone in the building already understood that the most important lesson of the day had taken place long before the ceremony began. Danielle walked to the front of the room and rested the briefcase on the podium. She looked across the audience, recognizing familiar expressions from the lobby as well as faces she had not yet met. Some reflected confidence. Others reflected concern. A few carried the unmistakable weight of self-reflection. She allowed the silence to settle before speaking. Thank you for being here. This morning did not unfold the way anyone expected, including me. However, leadership is not measured by perfect mornings. Leadership is measured by honest responses when plans change. Every eye remained fixed on her. When I accepted the responsibility of serving as your chief, I made one promise to this city before I ever made one to this department. I promised that every person who walks through our doors would be treated with dignity before assumptions, respect before conclusions, and fairness before judgment. Those values do not depend on rank, appearance, profession, or background. They depend on character. The room remained completely still. Danielle continued. The review of today's events will proceed according to policy. Facts will guide every decision. Every employee will receive due process. Accountability and fairness are partners, never opponents. Several supervisors nodded quietly. Deputy Chief Robert Hayes listened with visible relief, knowing the department had been given an opportunity to rebuild instead of divide. Danielle then looked toward the back of the room where Mark Harlan and Tyler Reed stood among the officers. She did not single them out. She did not humiliate them. Instead, she addressed everyone equally. Every badge represents public trust. Trust cannot be demanded. It cannot be inherited. It must be earned every single day through the choices we make when nobody believes those choices will matter. Her words lingered long after she stopped speaking. Emily Carter felt the weight of those sentences more than anyone. She realized that courage was not always loud. Sometimes it was as simple as allowing the truth to be recorded exactly as it happened. Outside, the morning sun had climbed high above the city, filling the conference room windows with warm light that softened the sharp edges of a difficult beginning. Danielle closed her briefcase and offered one final thought before ending the meeting. People often believe leadership begins when someone receives a title. I believe leadership begins much earlier, in the quiet moments when we choose how to treat another human being who appears to have nothing to offer us. Those moments define us far more than any ceremony ever will. No applause followed immediately. None was needed. The room understood that some lessons deserved reflection before celebration. As officers slowly returned to their duties, the framed values displayed throughout the building no longer looked like polished decorations hanging on clean walls. They looked like promises waiting to be honored. And long after the schedules were forgotten, the speeches were archived, and the welcome ceremony became another date in departmental history, one memory remained stronger than all the rest. They had believed authority belonged to the loudest voice in the room. That morning they discovered that real authority arrived quietly, observed patiently, spoke with respect, and allowed the truth to reveal everything on its own. Because a badge may identify a position, but character is what gives that position its meaning.